Hi, everyone. Welcome. First couple of minutes is just giving time for people to log on and we can just do a little informal chatting. Thank you for being here. We got some people who have been to these sessions and other sessions of ours before that know us and we know them and some new people. So we'll get a chance to meet as well.
Hey,
Donald,
Penny.
where are you? Yeah, hey Kevin. Good to see you. You're in Texas?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Great.
Nice weather this time of year, but won't last long.
I've heard it's getting hot and cold and hot and cold. Where
Yeah.
you're at.
The roller coaster.
Yeah. I'm going to Austin on Thursday, I think. Or no, next Thursday.
Yeah. I saw a meme. It's like, Texas weather throwing out lottery numbers, 65 one day, 15 the next.
Yep. Great. Excellent. And Maina, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Brussels in Belgium.
Oh, okay. Welcome. Welcome. Did I pronounce your name at all correctly?
Yes, you pronounced it correctly.
Oh, okay. Great. Excellent. And Donald, where are you joining us from?
Boston suburbs.
Oh, great. Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Roberto's in Vancouver. Chris is in New Jersey.
Yeah, right outside of Princeton.
Okay. Awesome. Great. I'm just going to wait one more minute. Perfect. And Sarah is managing everything. Where are you joining us from, Sarah?
I'm in Minnesota.
Minnesota. Awesome. And Nazanin is usually in Italy, but you're in Turkey?
Yes. Yes, right now I'm in Istanbul. Yes.
Awesome. Great. Nice. And Robert, I know you're muted, so I don't know if you can speak, but curious where you're joining us from. He's muted. Okay. Oh, there you are.
Sorry, I was just taking care of some stuff. I'm in New York.
Okay, great. Excellent. And Robert, I know that there are a couple people here who are part of our executive groups, like our chief strategy officers and chief innovation officers. This is a different group. It's much more kind of like a broad, open, diverse community of people from different industries and different functions and things. So
Yeah.
it's great that you're here, but know that, what we've been talking to you about is different than this.
Sure.
Just as you're aware. Yeah. Awesome. Great. Excellent. All right. I think we should get started. There you are, John. Good to see you. You're reaching us from Holland?
Belgium.
Belgium. Oh, great. We have two Belgian people here.
But being Dutch. So for the Belgian, I'm Dutch.
Great. Okay. Good. Got it. Awesome.
Hello, nice meeting all of you. Thank you for your time.
Yes. Awesome. Okay, we'll get started. We still have people joining. We always wish that we had more time, so I want to jump right in. My name's Kaihan Krippendorf. For those of you who I have not met before, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a quick overview of what we're going to cover. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms and let you guys introduce each other. And then we're going to hand it over to Roberto. This community is composed a lot of people who are driving innovation from within established companies, who work in multi-stakeholder contexts, who see around corners, smart enough to be humble, and we just bring topics that we all think are important. And certainly this topic, language of influence, is essential. It is the differentiator between having an idea and making it happen, of having a dream and making it real. It is the difference between creativity and innovation. They say that Steve Jobs had a reality distortion field around him. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You convince everyone that the iPhone is the best in the world and it's going to change the world. Well, then people believe it, they buy it, and it actually becomes true. So we're only going to have a little bit of time today, but this is a fundamental, and my research shows that successful internal innovators view the political and influence challenge as part of the problem-solving process. So that's why we're so excited to at least touch on it a little bit today. We just did 3 minutes of informal networking. We're going to have we're going to put you into breakout rooms and we're going to give you a prompt just to meet each other. If sometimes we go through each person introducing themselves here, but we don't want to take all of that time away from the topic. Then Roberto is going to unpack material for us. I'm going to tell you about him in a moment. And then we'll go to Q&A and group dialogue. That 25 to 20 minutes, it might be 10 minutes and 35 and 15 minutes, or it might be 10 minutes and 35 minutes, or it might adjust, but we really want to engage you in Q&A and dialogue because you learn so much from the people that are here. And then 5 minutes wrap up. We know that you have other things to do, so we will let you out definitely before the top of the hour, maybe a minute before. Roberto, he is one of the coaches that are part of the Outthinker coaches community. He's an internationally certified scaling up coach. He has 20 years of experience working inside for clients and inside companies across Europe, North America. He's a trainer, a speaker, certified, and this is sort of a passion and expertise of him that I learned about, and he and I talk about this a lot. He's a certified master NLP practitioner. Does anyone know what NLP stands for? Anyone other than Roberto? John?
Neuro-linguistic programming, but I'm not sure exactly what it means.
Yes, we'll find out what it means. Neuro-linguistic programming, really interesting. You know, my father was a professor of communications for 58 years, University of Pennsylvania, and he was the Batesman professor of communications. And so Batesman was sort of the academic grounding of NLP, and then it kind of split up into an academic and a practical one, and practical one became NLP. If you know Tony Robbins, he started off with NLP, and so that's kind of, if you think about the roots, but we can get into that. But it's more very practical techniques to shape how people think or see the world, understanding kind of the mechanics of how we see things and think of things and believe things. He works across a broad range of clients, from Fortune 500 companies like Accenture and Siemens to startups. He's a longtime mentor at the Founder Institute, and he's a former VP of business development at Julius Baer, where he led successful investment fund growth in the Italian market. So what Roberto is, just he knows his stuff, but he also works in both the entrepreneurial and the large enterprise context. So we're very excited to have him here with us. We're going to now break you up into smaller groups of about three people, a chance for you to introduce yourselves, and we're going to give you a prompt just to sort of prime your thinking a bit. Roberto, what would we like people to spend 5 minutes?
So out of all the things that we can talk about, I would like for you to refer to a leader that you had in your life that had an impact on you. And specifically about that leader, what was the language? What was in the way they spoke that was meaningful to you or impactful to you? So just think of a leader that was important in your career and specifically share one or two things in the language that was meaningful and valuable for you.
Great. So we'll put you in breakout rooms for 5 minutes. Let's make it 4 minutes. Make it 4 minutes. We'll come back exactly at 15 after the hour because we're kind of already into that 1 minute. We'll bring you back exactly at 15 after. All right, welcome back. How many people felt like that was enough time? It never feels like enough time. It never feels like enough time. It's always like everyone says, oh, we should turn this into a 2-hour session, but 2 hours is hard to make time for. So, but you're going to get to meet each other. We'll connect you with each other afterwards. So hopefully you guys can continue the conversation if you'd like to as well. All right, Roberto, we'll let you take over.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, first of all, Kayan, for inviting me. And I really appreciate this opportunity. I know that this group is very diverse. So we have different backgrounds, different roles within this group. And that makes it even more exciting because I get the most out of my presentation in the Q&A. So I will go through some content that obviously want to prompt your thinking and provide some valuable nuggets here and there in terms of language, in terms of what you can do to improve what you're already doing in a very practical manner. And at the same time, I invite you to prepare some questions because so I can take out of my head more that can serve you. So I'll start by sharing my slides. All right. So let's start with a statement that I know that also resonates with Kayan, because we often talk about the importance of language, because language does not just describe the reality. Language actually creates the reality. What we want to be mindful of is that the way we as human beings communicate with each other is through language that creates images, creates emotions, creates an internal representation of those words. And the way we use the words will generate different content for the people that we direct those words to. Now, one aspect that I want to say, this is my agenda in terms of what we're going to cover is that there is a lot. I mean, I'm really scratching the surface in 25 minutes. As you can imagine, there is so much. So I want to just give you 2 NLP presuppositions just to give you a taste of what it could be done. But just to give you an idea, there are probably 15 to 20 different presuppositions that you can anchor yourself to. I'll explain in a minute what they are. We're going to touch on the language spectrum. How do we go from precision language to persuasive language and to persuasion? Then what is the difference between the one-to-one communication and one-to-many communication? How can we just check on some aspects that we want to calibrate and make sure that they adjust the way we communicate? And then 3 practical tools. And I always up for something that you can walk away with. So my intention again on this presentation, I have about 25 minutes, so I may be a little fast at times. Write down if there is anything that you want me to dive in the Q&A, but ultimately is to leave you with something practical that you can use. And some of those tools will be more relevant than others, and it's totally fine. This is almost like, I like to consider my presentation like an Italian buffet. Obviously, I'm Italian, so I like food. And when you go to an Italian buffet, you have way more food than you can eat, but you choose because you know that you can't have everything. So you go and pick and choose what makes sense to you. So please do the same here. Pick and choose what's relevant, and whatever else is already known, just use it as a reminder. All right, so we talked about NLP. What is NLP? First, a definition, okay? Let's call it toolkit. There are many ways even to consider NLP, if it is a technique, if it is a process, but ultimately explains the relationship between the language, thought, and behavior. So how these 3 components interact. And how can we use these to communicate, influence, and lead more effectively? In other terms, just because very often this question comes up, is why neuro-linguistic programming? Neuro is the part how we experience the world through our senses. That's why the neurological component of this discipline. Linguistic, because ultimately we use language internally and externally to interpret and influence that experience. And then programming, because you can actually change it. That's the beautiful part. Like, we have freedom that sometimes we are not aware of, because we can create patterns in the way we think, in the way we behave. And so we can change them, therefore having them serve us. So I'm not going to go into the history, but just to give an idea, it was created in the 70s by Grinder and Bandler. And the intention was, what makes people effective? They started with therapists, and then from there they expanded in different fields. But the ultimate belief was, if somebody can do anything in a sport, in a leadership role, in any area, that means it can be duplicated, because they are human beings. So human beings must think, must behave in a way that can be replicated by another human being. So that's a very empowering, right? Very empowering concept that allows us to say why leaders should be caring about this. Because when you start looking into this model, you start creating a better rapport with others. So you kind of increase your precision, your flexibility. And one of the assumptions is that the more flexible you are, the more you can influence and control the situation you are in. So there is always this idea that controlling is very stiff, but control comes from being even more flexible. And that type of control is way more powerful, because it allows more engagement, more buy-in, and more opportunities for people to have a better experience at work and life. And then last but not least, obviously, is that you start aligning with the way people think, feel, and decide. So it's a large field, multiple parts and components. Let's trim it down to something that you can walk away with after this presentation and saying, okay, now I have something practical. 2 out of those 15 to 20 presuppositions that I'm going to share with you are: the first one, the map is not the territory. So this was actually a very important premise of the work, of the entire work. But just imagine having this idea constantly with you. The map is not a territory, reality is subjective. So what I see is not what the other person sees. what I feel is not what the other person feels. Think about interacting with other human beings, both at the individual level as well as at the company level. If you are communicating the strategy, for example, and the idea that whatever you see is not necessarily what other people are experiencing. Any map will never be a representation of the territory or an exact representation of the territory. That means that every single human being, that's at least my interpretation of this, is that we are all aliens from different planets. We think that we share part of the experience, but ultimately my background, my belief system, the way I was raised, what I lived in my life is completely different than every single other human being. Therefore, I built my map in a way that is totally unique to me. And that becomes my reality. And I'm going to act and think based on that reality. Now, when I'm interacting with any of you, you had the same process, customizing your own reality, building your own map. That means when I interact with you, I cannot assume that what's true for me, it's true for you. We are two aliens coming from different planets. There are different rules in our planets. The second thing, presupposition I would like for you to keep in mind is this, that the meaning of your communication is the response you get. The meaning of your communication is the response you get. You're always getting feedback. You need to adapt. You need to realize that communication as a term comes from Latin that means putting in common. So communication is different than broadcasting. It's not about just, I said it. That's not communicating. That's broadcasting. That's saying something with the hope that somebody is listening, understanding, and so on. So the meaning of the communication is the response you get, puts you in a driver's seat with the intention that until you get the result or the response that you want, you will keep communicating, you will keep putting in common until the commonality satisfies you. I'll go a little deeper into these two things. One aspect, the map is not a territory, just go back in time in the 1600, and this was the representation of the world. And obviously they made decisions based on this map. So your map can be expanded, can grow, can constantly evolve into something that is more functional. Something that helped you or served you in the past may not serve you now. That's true for you, and it's also true for the people that you work with. So when you, for example, are in a change management process and you realize that people have a resistance, just keep in mind this, their map could be completely different than what you imagine. Therefore, you want to start with their map and start evolving their map.
Roberto, will
yes.
we get the question is, will we get your slides?
For about $100,000 a slide, I can give the entire deck away.
Zimbabwean dollars?
What's that?
Zimbabwean dollars?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I will share the slides. Yes. So you don't need to take notes. I will be happy to share all the content.
Thank you.
So the intention here is to embrace that diversity, because communication, as much as we want to put in common, requires to have the view of different people having a different way of looking at things. Now, when we look at the second presupposition that I want you to keep in mind is that the response that you get is really a function of how you communicate. How you communicate is not just about how you speak. So if we look at the natural loss of information that happens, is that if I get a 100% what I want to say, it's in my head, I want to transfer this content, deliver this output. What I actually end up saying is way less, say 70%. Something stays in my head. Something will never make it through words. And now I say something, the sound comes out of my mouth. Guess what? You probably hear even less than what I said, because there is a distraction, because there is a notification on your screen, because you may be thinking about something I said, and there is interferences between what I say and what you hear. But then also what you understand. It could be my Italian accent that comes in the way, or maybe some of the words that I use may not be familiar to you, so you're giving different interpretation, or maybe the language, if you're using some jargon, you don't even get the jargon altogether. So there is even less. Now, what is even more terrifying is that if I were going to ask you in a week from this presentation, what you remembered, barely would be 10%. So in every interaction, this happens naturally. You can't really help from a distortion between what you want to say and what people remember. What you can do, though, is to reduce this loss. What you can do is work on every single one of these steps and say, how can I improve what I want to say and what I actually say with more preparation, maybe? And there are many techniques there, right? And with the way you say things, how can I keep the engagement so people hear more, even if they will not hear everything, but they will hear more. But more importantly, again, regardless now of the different techniques you can use, and I'm sure that you are all aware that there are many things you can do. What's important here is that at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to look at what the other person got, the 10%, and ask yourself, is the 10% that is the most relevant 10% out of everything that I said? And if the answer is no, then that's your responsibility to go back and fill the gap. It's not the listener responsibility to get what you say. So that's a very important transfer of knowledge. So let's see how we can reduce this loss of information in a few contexts that can help you. One spectrum that you can keep in mind when talking about language and communication in general is that you can go from high precision to high persuasion. In this spectrum, obviously, you can toggle and you can go from one to another depending on the scope. And two models that were studied by Richard Bandler and Grinder in the 70s when they developed NLP in the first place. And by the way, they were the first ones to admit that the name is the worst name that they could ever give to this methodology. So like they came up actually with the name by one afternoon. That's a story that I heard directly from Bandler. That they were studying and researching. They had a lot of research behind all of this, and there was a bunch of books on the table. And Grinder said, "How are we going to call this thing?" And they had books on neurology, they had books on linguistic, and then they had books in programming because back in the day they started some coding and stuff. So they just said neuro-linguistic programming. Here you go. Yeah, okay, let's call it that way. They never thought that it would have spread all across the world and had that label, terrible label attached to it, and difficult to from a marketing perspective for sure. Anyway, I love to use this. I used to teach NLP in the past. Now I use it within what I do. I don't teach it anymore. But it's, again, from a practicality perspective, let's get back here and see that the two main therapists that they studied and that were the most effective in that time were Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson. These two were completely opposite. Actually, they hate each other in a sense. Or actually, Virginia Satir didn't like the approach that Milton Erickson used, more specifically, I would say. And because they were at two extremes of communication. What they had in common, both of them were extremely effective in supporting, helping people getting out of their patterns and their patients. They had the highest rate of success. So let's look more specifically. What is the Virginia Satir? That was called the meta model. The meta model is a set of language patterns. We're going to see a few here. But the idea is you need specificity. You want to create alignment. You want to resolve confusion. That's when you tap into this meta model. Again, all these things can be researched by you, and you can dive in. I just want to give you some highlights. But the intention here is that you can be very, very precise when you need these things. On the other hand, you use the Milton model, that's what is called, coming from Milton Erickson, when you want to influence. So you want to kind of have a language that is more inspiring, vision casting or unifying ideas. You need to change completely the way you speak. Now, what does that look like? I'll give you some specific examples. So the precision model is very helpful when you work on the one-to-one communication. The reason is that if every single person has a different map, in a one-on-one, I can interpret and go deeper into that map. So what I do is I use the meta model in clarifying and challenging any vague language that I hear and get to the heart of the message. Let me give you an example. You say something like, this is very difficult to execute, or this strategy is very complicated. This statement can be interpreted by me, or I can dive in and ask questions. What specifically do you mean by that? So now I'm challenging that vagueness. I'm challenging what I'm hearing to understand a little bit more of what's being communicated. Same line is, but a different type of question. How do you know that's true? How do you know something? And now, what is the assumption that you're making that I'm not hearing, and maybe you are not clear about at the same time? So getting a little bit more to explore the map. If my map is not your map, I can't assume that what you're saying is what I believe it is. So I'm going to double down. And then also when people say, I can't do this, or it's very difficult for me to execute, and what will happen if we do that? Or if you do that? Now, it's really a shift also. Like you doubling down, the person is maybe focused on an obstacle, and now you're shifting them on the solution. And remember, all these questions, like the precision model and asking questions and using very, very specific data or specific language that can reduce the interpretation and reduce the vagueness, requires rapport. Without rapport, it becomes really like being in front of a police officer that is asking questions. You need to get in deep rapport with the person in front of you before asking any of these questions, because they will be very, very, it's like drilling down, and it's really important that you have a strong connection. So we speak with precision language. On the other side of the spectrum, we look at persuasion. And when we go into persuasion, now this language is usually more effective on one-to-many communication. So not necessarily in the one-to-one, there are parts in the coaching or mentoring where this helps, but in general, I'll give you some examples here. Again, we do the opposite of what Virginia Satir was doing with her questions and their language. Here we're using intentionally language that is ambiguous, language that is meant to influence, engage, and that intentionally we speak to unconscious mind. How do we speak to the unconscious mind? Very briefly, keep in mind that our brain is designed to fill the gaps. So whatever we see, we're trying to interpret based on the elements that we have. So if I give you a very general description, you try to customize that description to make it have sense for your own reality. So let me give you some examples here. I may use some language patterns, like I may incorporate some commands in what I'm saying. You might start to notice how much more clear things become as you listen to me speak today. So what I said, that makes total sense. The reality is, if we investigate the sentence a little bit more, we realize that there was a suggestion that I put into that sentence that means that automatically you will gain more clarity. Now I'm speaking to your subconscious level, mind. That means that I'm giving an instruction that increases your ability to look for clarity rather than look for problems and things that I could evoke if I use a different language. Another powerful way to persuade is use metaphors and stories. Very well known, but why that works, it's interesting because we use language to have internal representation. Again, a metaphor or a story allow us to say, oh, okay, this is a general framework. How does this apply to me? And again, we use our map to fill those gaps. Or mind reading. Now, you kind of presume something here. An example is, I know you're probably already wondering how to apply this idea in your own team. Okay? And this presume already understanding and taps into the listener thoughts, making them feel understood. Meaning the language can be crafted in a way that allows you to speak in terms that cannot be specified. This is not when you use data. This is not when you are super specific. This is the political language. Why politicians use a very, very vague language because they speak to very large audiences. So when they say that they want improved life conditions, or they want to have better family opportunities, they are not saying anything because those terms are completely empty. But depending on where I am, if my family doesn't have an opportunity to live in Vancouver because the real estate cost is too high, now I'm relating to that language. I think, oh, okay. Unconsciously, I'm making that connection, and I'm thinking that the politician is going to help me establish my family in the city. They didn't say that. I fill the gap. But when I'm communicating within the company, I need to toggle between these two. Sometimes I need intentional language that is more vague. So let me wrap it up, because otherwise we're not going to have time for Q&A, and I really value that part. On the one-to-one communication, remember those things. First, build rapport. And one way to do it is look at your language and explore how your map of your language can be matched with the person in front of you. The way the person is, the body language is really important also, right? Mapping, mirroring, it's really important. And the tonality or the speed. For people that are very reflective and they speak very slowly, you need to slow down as much as possible. For people that go faster, you want to be a little faster. Use the meta model, as we said. And for one-to-many communication instead, go into more sensory rich messages. Use visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I'll get back in a moment on this topic. And the idea is that you're communicating with general language, so you want to use Milton model. And again, you can search that. You don't need to become a master as much as you understand that general terms allow people to customize those terms more than specificity. And when you speak to a large audience, again, via email or what else, it's really important that you go with starting where they are. Now, same for the one-to-one communication. You want to start where the person is. There is an expression that could be helpful for you to remember. Meet people where they are before you want to lead them where you want them to go. So it's really important on the one-to-one to create that connection and see what are the problems that they are experiencing, the challenges, the expectations. So meet them there and then lead them somewhere else. Same with the audience. You want to address the concerns. Cayenne has one of the frameworks that he uses is called GAME. And in that framework, again, there is the understanding of what the audience wants first. Acknowledge that and then lead them where you want them to go. Okay, I promised 3 practical tools, and then we are done for this quick marathon. First, do a language pattern audit. What that means is that before a presentation, an email, or a meeting, whatever the case is, ask yourself these questions. Am I using precision or persuasion? Am I being very data-driven, or am I too generic? Am I doing that intentionally or not? That's the key question. And remember, if I'm trying to convince somebody and I'm giving too many data points, that may not be the way that person gets persuaded. At the same time, if I'm having a one-on-one and I'm speaking like a politician, that person may leave thinking, okay, what is all this about? I mean, this doesn't make sense to me. But an audience would probably feel that language is more resonating. And check what are the moments, because as much as the language is also when is the right time to go from general to specific. Sometimes you speak to a person, you want to encourage that person, you want to provide them some specific data, some specific elements to understand the strategy, and then give an encouragement that is more like a general presentation. So the ability to dial in and zoom out constantly by choice is the part that we want to master over this first level of communication. The second one is how you reframe what you're saying. So when there is an objection, or there is something there is a tension or conflict or some level of uncertainty, people tend to narrow down on the problem. Can you shift, reframe, from a problem to a possibility. Leave the problem where it is, still acknowledging it, but what else is possible? What can we do? Can you shift from blaming to curiosity? It's not whose fault that is, but more like, what can we do? How this happened in the first place? How can we empower what we're doing? And how can we evolve from right or wrong, we got it, we failed, we won, to something, okay, what did we learn from this? How can we keep working on this? Now, these are mindset, but also in the language. What you say in a presentation, again, or in a conversation will make a huge impact on the way people think. And so here are the three examples. What would it look like if, or I wonder what happens when we do this or that, or we say this. That's one perspective. Here's another. So kind of language that shifts the focus from one area to another. Last tool, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic alignment. Now, this is really important when you deliver a message or a speech, or even when you share your vision, because people are predominantly in one of these three categories. So we all have a preference for visual components or auditory components or kinesthetic components. Now, what we don't usually, and this is pretty simple to understand, but what we don't pay enough attention is the fact that the language creates, again, images in people's mind. So the way I speak can create an image. The way I speak, as you can see in the second one, that sounds like a win. I'm sure this resonates with you. Okay, kinesthetic, this approach feels right. I'm sure that once you let it sink in, you see the terminology that I'm using, or I'm going to let you digest this. If the person is more kinesthetic, these terms will resonate more. Now, when we speak to a large audience, we can go crazy trying to understand who's visual, who's auditory, who's kinesthetic. So the trick here is use all of them. Make sure that there is variety, because if you speak only with your language, people will understand, but there will not be total alignment with and engagement. And this, again, it's a valuable thing because now you're matching the preferred sensory style. If I had more time, I would have given you 3 stories of me walking on a beach and giving you visual story, an auditory story, a kinesthetic story, show you how some of you will resonate more with one or the other. But you can imagine right now what that looks like, and I'm sure that you can see the power of having different terminology in any presentation that can empower the people that are listening to you. So I think I was 3 or 4 minutes longer than I was supposed to be, but I made it, and I'm
yeah,
happy
but it's
to
great
open up.
content. It's just such rich content. I know
It is.
Yeah, so we're going to get to Q&A. We're just going to do Q&A all the way to the top of the hour, about 1 minute before we're going to do a survey, but we're going to try to get as much Q&A time as we can. So I just want to emphasize why this is like so powerful. I gave a speech maybe last month for a company. I think they're like they're number 60 on the Fortune 500 list. And yet I had four versions where we, conversations with their head of strategy and head of marketing going through it. The CEO of this company, 60th largest in the world, looked at my speech twice and gave me specific feedback. And it was like, we don't want to say innovation. We don't want to say strategy versus innovation. We don't want to. So we went with this thing, a new game, winning the new game. It's about intensity. And so the metaphor was the new game changes. And then when we told the story, it was you get on the field, you feel the grass, you see the green field, and you hear the whatever. And so they were very, very particular because they had their top 150 people there, and it was really important that they landed the strategy. So good companies, good leaders, they do think at this deep level about the communicating and landing of their strategy.
Did the stadium cheer?
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how to, but they were very silent. But afterwards, they said that they were using my words. That was the best thing that they said. Even the board members, when they were on stage later, they said the new game. They said outthink. They used some of those things. Awesome. Coach K from Duke was before me, so I had a tough act to follow. But the point is, paying attention to it. Great leaders pay attention to this. So Q&A. Who's got a question or a comment? Yes, Maina.
Yes, thank you very much for Roberto for the presentation. Back to your decreasing percentage between emission and reception. When thinking about the top, let's say the most top, the must-have top 10%, I was thinking sometimes you might think, or you might feel that you need a little bit more than those. You need to be more than those 10% to make sure that people get to the right 10% that you really want them to get out of your presentation. So I was thinking about maybe an advice or what your thoughts were about striking the balance between the absolute must-have 10% for the people to get off their presentations and what additional percentage you may need to actually get them to that result.
Sure. Thank you for that question, because it allows me to close the loop there. Using the VAK, for example, approach, the visual auditory kinesthetics, reduces dramatically their loss, because many times people get lost for lack of references in the language. One aspect that I recommend to all the leaders I work with is when they have one-on-one and they experience some kind of regular misunderstanding with the person that they're speaking to, the process is very simple. That I tell them to start the meeting with that person saying, okay, I'm going to talk to you about this project. We're going to talk about this. At the end of the meeting, I would like for you to recap what I said, the instructions I gave or whatever. Not because I think you're stupid by any means, but because I know that there's going to be something that I don't say, something that will be misunderstood, something that in the communication is going to be lost. So please take the notes that you need or ask the questions that you need, because at the end, I want you to reformulate what I said. By doing that, now that allows me to fill the gaps. Once you tell me what you got out of this project or out of my instructions, I'm going to see if you missed a deadline or if you missed the qualitative aspect of my instructions, or if you're unclear about something. And that increases also during my presentation or my explanation, the attention that the other person puts into what I'm saying. They will be more active, they will take notes, they will ask questions, because they know that at the end they will recap what are the most important things. So that's one way for the one-on-one to increase the 10% to 20, 30%, and more importantly, to what's meaningful. With an audience, you need to use a set of little other aspects, meaning like you need to have something tangible that they can walk away with. It could be a presentation, right? It could be an handout. It could be a recording that they can go back and listen to. You use the repetition during what the message is, especially if there are instructions and you're not just inspiring them. But there are like different techniques. The intention here is your responsibility is to find a way, depending on who you're speaking to make sure that they leave with what you want them to leave with. Don't leave their responsibility to them.
Maybe I should add like one other thing. When you see that graph of that 100% down to 10%, I think that one of the messages that you're looking, if the outcome is the message, a good person is constantly looking at how are they breathing, are they leaning in, are they distracted, how are they reacting, and it's you're not thinking about coming out of your mouth. You're adjusting to the reaction,
right?
And then you're changing what you're doing until you get the reaction. The real engagement or whatever. It's that's
a feedback loop that you want to keep alive and stay connected. Don't be a radio where you're broadcasting the message. Be in constant contact. It's a dance. Like once you communicate, it's a dance. So you can't dance by yourself. You have a partner in your arms. So you go together. So you constantly see and adjust accordingly.
Thanks for the response. Very useful.
You're very welcome.
Great. We've got a few more minutes. Other questions?
Maybe I can ask. Sorry.
No, go ahead, John.
Just quickly, maybe. I mean, the one thing that strikes me is that I haven't heard you talk about listening at all in all this. It's all about speaking. And as you said, communicare originally is putting things in common, right? And so that is a two-way street. Any thoughts on the role of listening?
And you're totally right. Okay, the active listening in the one-on-one is critical. For me, that captured within building the rapport and maintaining the rapport during the communication. So if I want to make sure that I stay in contact, I need to see. It's like there is a sensory acuity that goes even beyond listening with your ears. You wanna listen by looking at the other person's body language, as I mentioned, or listening to the words that they're using, how they're using it, and then use your language. As you said, I put more emphasis on the language, on the words, on the speaking, just to say you are the one that is communicating. How can you be more powerful in your way of influencing? But the premise of all of that is, again, to start where people are. And to do that, you need to listen, you need to understand their values if needed, you need to understand what the emotional state is, and then move them from there towards your outcome. But thanks for pointing that out, because that was probably one of the things that stayed in my head in the first graph, right? It's so critical. You can't do anything without proper listening.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for this. I got a lot out. One of the nuggets is that we own the response of the other person. That's really helpful. A lot of us don't want to do that. Question for you: how much influencing can come from sharing your own personal motivation behind what you're trying to get done, specifically around change and driving change? You know, what are your thoughts, Roberto, on sharing personal motivation around that change?
It depends on the intention that you have. Like, sharing our motivations can be a very powerful way to connect, because it shows vulnerability, shows openness, it shows honesty. But in a sense, again, it's not about you. It should be about the other person. What's in it for them? So if we flip that, sure, you can share what your motivations are, but your focus should be on what are your motivations? How can I engage you more? Right? It's like it's a different type of approach altogether. So one distinction I make very strongly, for example, when I talk about people, I really don't like when it's used the term retention. Like, we need to retain talent. I hate that word, because retention immediately, for me, that obviously I'm not a English native speaker, it makes me think about high retention facilities. So sure, I want to retain the talent. What does that mean? I'm going to put bars on the windows, I'm going to lock the door, and I'm going to keep the talent inside? No, that comes from fear that they're going to leave. So I need to retain them. I switch, in terms of terminology, to engagement. How can I engage you? So now I'm thinking about you. What can I do to make you happy, to want you to stay? So the same way, when I'm in a change management, it's not about why am I doing this? Sure, I can share it for information, but my attention will be what are you getting? What are you getting out of this? What are the problems that you see that I'm not seeing? How can I help you? How can I make this experience better?
I'd like to do a whole session just on that. Practicing that. We're going to do a poll. I know we only have 60 seconds left. We're going to do a poll. If you could take 5 of those seconds to just give us an NPS score. Maybe we have time for one last question.
Yeah, so somebody.
So it's too much. I know. Maybe if there's interest, we'll do a longer session. We could do some applications. This stuff is so powerful, and there's so many layers to it. Yeah,
just
go ahead.
A quick feedback. The second tool about reframing, in fact, I use it at the beginning of my training session as ground rules, you know, to shift from problem to possibility. If you want to complain, okay, but propose something, or at least stay open. Yeah. And I write it down on a paperboard that I keep on the wall, you know. And someone comes back to a criticism or a negative loop, I just point to the rules and say, we agreed on that.
Yeah.
So thank you for emphasizing that.
Great. All right, we're going to wrap up here. Want to always fit nicely into your busy schedules. Roberto, thank you so much for unpacking for us so much here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right. We'll share you the recording. We're going to ask you what do you want to cover next. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Ciao. Thank you. Great job, Roberto.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome, Roberto. Nice seeing you.
Hi, good to see you too.
Awesome.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
All right. Bye.